The Mega Man X games were some of the best platformers on the Super Nintendo. One of the reasons they were so popular was that they took the framework established by the earlier 8-bit games in the franchise and added new layers of polish on top, both in terms of presentation and gameplay additions. That's why it's so interesting to see it all come full circle. Capcom packaged up the Mega Man X experience, jammed it into a Game Boy cartridge, and delivered it back to the world as Mega Man Xtreme. There are two main questions that need to be addressed. The first is how Mega Man Xtreme compares to other Game Boy games. The answer is pretty well. The graphics are nicely detailed, the music is catchy, and the game is a fairly good length for a platformer on the handheld console. However, what's really interesting is how it plays as a Mega Man X title, and that's where the answer is a little more complicated. Mega Man Xtreme is basically an 8-bit remix of Mega Man X1 and X2. However, the hardware discrepancy between the Super Nintendo and the Game Boy Color meant that sacrifices had to be made. Visually, Xtreme uses a similar color palette, and the sprites are actually extremely impressive representations of the originals. The music also captures the essence of the original games well. The big problem comes in the level design and general flow of the game. The power of the Super Nintendo gave Capcom the opportunity to really open up the stages, making them feel huge and sprawling. Instead of feeling like you were moving screen to screen as in the earlier Mega Man games, the X series gave the player the feeling that they were dropped into a living, breathing world, encouraging exploration on a level previously unseen in Mega Man games. This aspect has been cut down in Xtreme, with stages broken up into sections by flashing doors. This makes each area feel more like a set of challenge rooms than the vast locations produced in the 16-bit games. Furthermore, the dynamic nature of the stages has also been reduced. This was to be expected when porting down to the handheld, but it still had a drastic effect on the game. Compare the highway stage, when you managed to defeat a helicopter in the Super Nintendo version, to the same moment in Xtreme. Functionally, it's somewhat similar, but it feels very different. There are lots of moments like these throughout the game that just don't quite feel right on the Game Boy, and perhaps they should have been removed altogether if they weren't going to work as well on the handheld system. This is not to say they did a bad job with this game. In fact, it's startling just how much of X1 and X2 they managed to pack into Xtreme. The thing to remember is that the massive upgrade in presentation was one of the main things that elevated the X series over the originals in the first place. When you strip that back, the remaining game is not that different from the originals. Personally, I prefer the older handheld Mega Man games to this one. The straightforward level design and simple gameplay feels like a better fit to the format to me. Xtreme is still a worthwhile addition to the series, and an impressive technical feat for the Game Boy. Just don't expect it to hit the highs of the Super Nintendo originals.